You are listening to Diasporic music on Black Power 96. Black Power 96 with Melinda Francis, Norman Richmond, and joining us on the line is Dr. Gerald Horne, a regular on the show, and he is, I guess, his last book is The Counter-Revolution of 1836, Texas Slavery and Jim Crow, and the Roots of American Fascism. And he has nearly 50 books, maybe 50 books at this particular point. And I guess the first question I want to ask you, sir, is how are you feeling today?
Oh, I'm fine, but I'm a little, like many, distressed by the events in Memphis, Tennessee. You may have heard
that was my first question.
That a young black worker, Mr. Nichols, was killed by 5 black officers of the law. Now, this raises a number of questions. One, it brings into sharp relief the demand that emerged in the wake of civil unrest and urban revolt in Los Angeles and elsewhere in the 1960s, that there be more black officers hired. Well, we see the fruits of that, I'm afraid to say, although I think at the time that many of us did not necessarily see that as a panacea, but saw it as a step. As you oftentimes hear this idea that you have these reformist demands so that the masses will come to see that the problem is not the lack of reform, the problem is the dearth of democracy and the system that is capitalism. In any case, what's even more remarkable is that you have some folks on the left who are suggesting that since all the officers were black, that shows that talking about race and racism is misguided and misleading. Well, number one, these officers were defending a white supremacist, capitalist, heterosexist, misogynist, anti-black system. And historically, that system has been able to hire people who are melanin rich to protect their interests. For example, this coming Saturday on Freedom Now KPFK, 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern, we're interviewing a scholar who's done work on the 1811 revolt of the enslaved in southern Louisiana, the largest in history of the United States. Of course, that revolt did not succeed, not least because free men of color, so-called, in a militia were enlisted to crush it. I mean, I could recite an entire litany of similar types of events. And then what's even more striking is that the so-called police union in Los Angeles, which has dipped its hands in black blood more than once, had the audacity and temerity to call for throwing the book at these Memphis police officers, which of course happened quite promptly. And one awaits for this so-called union in Los Angeles to say the same thing about officers of the state defined as white who kill black people on a regular basis. When are they going to say, throw the book at them? Well, don't hold your breath. Or, as some have recalled, what happened in Minnesota a few years ago when an officer of Somali ancestry killed a Euro-Australian woman accidentally, apparently. They threw the book at him. And so
he's still locked up, right?
I'm not sure, but they certainly threw the book at him. So somebody needs to tell me why these folks on the left, the Euro-American left, are always trying to downplay the question of racism, even though they supposedly like the idea of class. At least that's what they tell us. But when it comes to looking at the class of unpaid workers, otherwise known as the enslaved, a segment of the working class, as are their descendants, including myself, suddenly they don't engage in class analysis. Class goes out the window. So this episode in Memphis is very distressing. It's all too repetitive. what makes it even more frustrating is that there is hardly an analysis of why we are at this point. There's hardly an analysis that points to what happened in Memphis in January 2023 as the inevitable outgrowth of establishing a slaveholders' republic in the late 18th century, in which our ancestors fought against relentlessly up until that system was ushered off center stage in the 1860s. And when you fight against a system and that system continues to stand, you should expect to be pulverized and penalized. Unless and until, as our ancestors were able to do, you're able to rally the international community. They did so by aligning with the Haitian Revolution. And by the way, we're going to be interviewing on KPFK Los Angeles in a few weeks Leslie Alexander, the sister of Michelle Alexander of the New Jim Crow fame, about her book, Fear of a Black Republic, Haiti and the Birth of Black Internationalism in the United States. And that Black internationalism helped to hasten the exit from center stage of enslavement, just like the rise of a socialist camp and its assistance to African liberation movements and Caribbean liberation movements helped to erode Jim Crow. But now that sort of internationalism seems to be a fading memory. And therefore, when a tragedy, an obscenity, such as occurred in Tennessee takes place, there is hardly any analysis that will help to lead to deeper understanding, which then will lead to a movement to extirpate this foulness from the landscape.
You're listening to Diasporic Music with Melinda Francis, Norman Richmond. We're on the line with Dr. Gerald Horne. And I remember it was Muhammad Ahmed, who at that time was Maxwell Curtis Stanford Jr. He talked about Black internationalism. That was in the 60s, and I guess one of the reasons why J. Edgar Hoover considered him one of the most dangerous men in the United States. And in Memphis, I remember I was in Memphis. The first time I went to Memphis was in the 70s. I went to I came there during the day. At that time, as they say, slipping into darkness. I was underground. So I went to the movie theater to see the film George Jackson. And this was during the day, and there were three people in the theater: an elder Euro-American couple and me. There were three people in the theater, and I remember Taj Mahal did the music, and the music was steel. He had a lot of steel pans. I don't know if it was Greenwich, the Trinidadian brother Greenwich, that was doing the steel drum work, but I never will forget that as long as I live. And Memphis is the birthplace of Aretha Franklin, and the place where Dr. Martin Luther King, where his life was snuffed out.
It's also alongst the Mississippi River, as are New Orleans and St. Louis, where I first saw the light of day. And as I said in my jazz book, New Orleans is generally given credit as the birthplace for this music now referred to as jazz. And I think it has a lot to do with the fact that archivists and researchers at Tulane University began in the 1950s conducting oral histories with New Orleans musicians, which I drew upon from my book and other historians draw upon. And sadly, archivists and librarians and researchers at Memphis State University did not do the same thing. Because I think if they did, you could make an argument for Memphis as much as New Orleans, right down the river, being the birthplace of numerous trends in music. And of course, we all know about what's happened subsequently in Michigan with the fact that the great saxophonist Charles Lloyd comes out of Memphis. If I'm not mistaken, and Norman, I'm sure you can correct me, Jimmy Lunkford comes out of Memphis, and the list is long.
Oh, yeah. Yes, Memphis, I guess, producing Aretha, that would put them on the map by itself. You're listening to Diasporic Music on Black Power 96. Oh, I wanted to say that, Benny Golson we just did a special on Benny Golson, and he just celebrated his birthday. And what are your thoughts on Benny Golson? He's had an illustrious, I guess that's kind of putting it mild. I guess he's 83 maybe now, but
oh no, I think it's 94.
Yeah. No, you're right. Yeah, because he was born probably 1930. Yes. What are your thoughts on Mr. Golson?
Well, as you know, once again, Freedom Now KPFK Los Angeles, 11 a.m. Pacific on Saturdays. We feature the music regularly of our innovators in that music we call jazz, playing underneath, for example, an interview like this. And
right, exactly. Right.
And of course, we've featured and will continue to feature the music of Benny Golson in that regard. I know in the past we've done Killer Joe. In the future, probably as soon as February, we'll be doing Along Came Betty, Whisper Not. And actually, I have a secret agenda. And I'll confess it on air, because I don't think that Quincy Jones listens to diasporic music, although he should. And since Quincy Jones is in Los Angeles, and I know he's buddy with Benny Golson, I'm hoping that he's driving or is being driven along the freeway in Los Angeles, tunes in to Freedom Now, hears the music of his comrade, Benny Golson, that says, oh, let me write out a big check to KPFK Pacifica Radio.
Well, Mr. Quincy Jones did a lot of research in Toronto, and he bought a lot of. He did a lot of research for a lot of his movies. He did a lot of research in Toronto at Third World Books and Crafts, a bookstore that was owned by Leonard O. Johnston and his wife Gwen Johnston. And Lenny was a member of the Canadian Communist Party and born in Toronto of Jamaican parents. And Quincy Jones, well, everybody went there. Ivan Dixon, the great actor, For the Love of Ivy. And I remember Ivan Dixon said he was always in and out of Hollywood because he would be fired for speaking up and defending, black folks. But I agree. I agree with you in terms of Benny Golson is the man. And you're listening to Diasporic Music on Black Power 96. You had some questions, Melinda?
Yeah, we're kind of behind. We didn't get to this last week, and I really want your thought about the ban of African American history in the schools in Florida.
Well, yeah, I'll get to that. I should also mention that Tucker Carlson, who's one of the top-rated commentators in the United States, he spoke the other day about backing a move from the United States to invade Canada and overthrow the Trudeau regime. So, I mean, you're laughing now, but when the stormtroopers...
I know.
Oh, you heard about that?
No, I'm like, it's not funny because that's totally possible. It could happen.
Yeah, he says, why is the United States wasting its time in Ukraine when it's this big prize north of the border? It doesn't make any sense. And of course, part of his rationale was because you recall what happened with the truckers' blockade in Ottawa. He felt that Mr. Trudeau was much too harsh towards those folks, and so he wants retribution. In any case, with regard to Governor DeSantis of Florida trying to circumscribe the teaching of Black American history, this is a prelude to his race for the White House. He obviously thinks that he can get a corner on the racist vote, although Donald Trump will have something to say about that. But I don't know if I mentioned that I saw Woman King, the Viola Davis vehicle, about these Black women in West Africa, in Dahomey, if I'm not mistaken, who formed a brigade to repel enslavers. Now, I mentioned this on another program where I said that when watching this film, which is a major capital investment, filmed in South Africa, it's a major Hollywood blockbuster, and yet you watch that film and you realize that for Black people, needless to say, coming to the United States was not their idea of living the good life, because they would be exported as enslaved people. And any accurate or adequate teaching of Black history tends to contradict the uplifting, glorious narrative that's forced down the throats of our youth in classrooms in this country. And that's one of the reasons why Governor DeSantis wants to circumscribe the teaching of Black history, because he wants the fairy tale to be taught. Now, the footnote I would drop is that whenever I mention Woman King, I get emails because many people felt that they didn't like the Woman King for whatever reason. I won't go into that because that would be a major digression. So before some of your listeners repair to their keyboards to send me an email, let me assure you that I'm aware of the criticism.
You're listening to Diasporic Music on Black Power 96. Dr. Gerald Horne, the author of his most recent book is A Counter Revolution of 1836, Texas Slavery and Jim Crow and the Roots of Americano Fascism. What are your thoughts on Ukraine, Russia, and South Africa?
Well, let's start with South Africa. I think we mentioned before how the United States is upset with South Africa because the government is going to engage with military maneuvers with Russia and China. South Africa is firmly part of BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, which is challenging the G7 led by the United States, and it's accompanied by its comical sidekick in Ottawa as well. And as part of this antagonism towards South Africa, which the North Americans are upset with because South Africa will not join the sanctions crusade against Russia, there are some interesting little factoids your audience should be familiar with. One is that the new chief of staff of Mr. Biden, Mr. Zients, Z-I-E-N-T-S, is married into a major South African family that made a fortune during the apartheid era from mining, the brutalization of Black labor. That's the Mellon family, M-E-L-L-E-N, not the Mellons of the United States, M-E-L-L-O-N. And as well, Hunter Biden, the notorious son of Mr. Biden, is also married into a prominent apartheid South African family. We all know about Elon Musk, who, by the way, spent time in Canada, as you recall, and is reputedly the richest man in the country. Recently, until his stock fell and Tesla fell, the richest man in the world. He lost a reputed $200 billion last year. And some enterprising journalist needs to do a story, an investigation of these refugees from apartheid South Africa who are now in North America, perhaps trying to recreate what they left behind. And if that story is done, also keep in mind the role of Peter Thiel, T-H-I-E-L, another billionaire who grew up in Namibia of German roots. And he helped to found this firm called Palantir, Palantir, which works hand in glove with the U.S. national security state in terms of intelligence, and probably, although I can't document this right now, but I would say probably works hand in glove with Pegasus, Pegasus, which is the notorious Israeli firm, which can penetrate your mobile phone without you clicking on anything and can turn your mobile phone into a spy against you by turning on the camera and turning on the tape without your clicking on anything. So once again, instead of some of our friends on the left bemoaning the rise of China, which of course the United States helped to accelerate, they need to be doing some serious research because, as I've oftentimes suggested to younger people on the left in this country, Black people in the United States may face a very serious dilemma, i.e., somehow manage to participate in the seizure of power or run the risk of being liquidated.
And you're listening to Diasporic Music with Melinda Francis, Norman Richmond. We're on the line with Dr. Gerald Horne. So I guess as the Imam Emil Abdullah Alamin always says, he has a bit of advice for the left. That advice is don't get left. Yeah, Jamil Alamin, have you heard anything about his case recently?
Well, yes. As a matter of fact, you know Ron Wilkins, right?
Is Texas big or is 7-Up? Oh yeah, I know very well.
Well, I understand that the former H. Rap Brown is in prison in Arizona, and Ron Wilkins may have some detail about that. I'll just leave it at that. And you should probably interview him.
All right. Yeah, I think we haven't talked on the radio many moons, but Ron Wilkins has a lot of. He's an archivist, a great photographer. I went to Libya. Remember, he's got pictures of Muammar Gaddafi, pictures of Secretary was in the Congo. Lived in Belize for a second. Yeah, he's an African internationalist. That's what he was. The Patrice Lumumba Coalition with the Long Bay Brass and Herb. What's the brother's name that started the Patrice Lumumba? One of the founders. Short brother, older brother. He was even older than the Long Bay. Irv Davis. Is it Irv Davis?
That may be him.
He was a Quaker, I think. Okay. Is there anything else, Melinda?
Well, I know. Gerald has to go, so I was wondering, what do we have? Do you want to talk about the Roberta Flack documentary?
Oh yeah, it's on. You can watch it free on the PBS website. You recall Roberta Flack, roots in Virginia, attended Howard University. Great voice, great pianist, great singer. Duets with the late great Donny Hathaway. Check it out. Duets
Peebo Bryson.
Peebo Bryson. She's the man who brought Luther Vandross from her backup singers to center stage. It's really it's a very good documentary. I recommend it. And by the way, the nephew of McCoy Tyner, Michael Tyner, was a producer of this documentary.
McCoy Tyner. That's Jarvis Tyner's. McCoy is the younger brother, right?
Yeah, Michael is Jarvis's son.
Oh, okay, all right. I remember the newspapers up here used to always refer to the Jamaican-born McCoy Tyner, and I remember the first time I sat down with him. That was the first question I asked him. I said, "Do you actually have Jamaican roots?" And he bust out laughing. He said, "Yes." He said, "I do. if it's Jamaicans in North Carolina, but, yeah, but I don't know nothing about this Jamaican situation. I was born in Philly, and my people were North Carolina. Yeah, he became an Ahmadiyya Muslim, I guess, around 16 or 17. I remember. I guess that's in your book, I believe. You talked about. I know you've written articles about the Ahmadiyyas in terms of their the whole question of the Ahmadiyya Muslims in Islam.
I should mention that Michael Tyner's mother is Jamaican, the late Leith Mullings, a world-class anthropologist, and also formerly the president of the American Anthropological Association, the leading academic body in the United States, perhaps North America, with regard to the study of anthropology. And she, of course, like a number of other Black women anthropologists, including my late neighbor from Harlem, Angela Gilliam, helped to steer that scholarly field to the left.
Angela, I have her book. I think you turned me on to her book decades ago. She did a book on Paul Robeson, right?
Angela?
Yeah.
She may have. Angela, I mentioned her also because, speaking of books, she's featured in the new book by Quito Swan, Quito, Quito, Swan, Swan, entitled Pacific of Black. It's an exploration of the Melanesian population of the South Seas. And actually, one of the reasons why I have to depart early, because I have to record a video, because I was on a committee that just awarded that book its top prize. He's a Bermudian ancestry, but as a matter of fact, his earlier books all deal with Black Bermuda history.
And the Bermudians have made a major being such a small country, they've made in political history, in terms of sports history, for a small place like that, they produce some great scholars, some great athletes, some warriors, and so on and so forth, wouldn't you say?
Oh, sure. And of course, there is a close relationship between Bermuda and the Carolinas. If you look at your map, you'll see Bermuda's due east of the Carolinas. And I said in one of I think it was the Negro Comrades of the Crown book, that when Britain began to move towards abolishing slavery in the 1830s, and some of the slave masters thought that their property was going to become worthless, so they had a fire sale of Negroes, sending them into the Carolinas for a pretty penny.
And the women in Bermuda, as small as that island is, they always, many times they make the Olympics in terms of the relays. If I'm not mistaken, they produce some great female sprinters.
Also, the billionaire Michael Bloomberg and the actor-producer Michael Douglas both live at least part of the year in Bermuda. And I did research in Bermuda for the Negro Comrades of the Crown book. And I'm reluctant to say this, but I'll say it anyway. I didn't see any slums in Bermuda. And maybe they're there and I just didn't see them, but I went all over the archipelago. And I found that remarkable.
There's a young man by the name of Arnold Miners, who has been a big supporter of diasporic music and a big supporter of the Black left in Toronto. He's from Bermuda. I'm going to ask him about that question. I think he did tell me one time that there was a small ghetto there, and I think he said he lived there. So I'll ask him about that.
Maybe I didn't get to every spot on the archipelago.
Yeah. Yes, sir. I think it's time for you to get in the whirlwind, sir.
Yeah. Good luck to you. Talk to you soon.
And we have been speaking to Dr. Gerald Horne and Melinda Francis. Next week we are raising funds for Black Power 96 and for Diasporic Music, and we want you to get your checkbooks out and your. Do we accept? Was it cryptocurrency? I'm just joking.
I don't know, but yeah, it's blackpower96.org/donate time. So any amount counts. So the next little while, that's what we'll be, encouraging listeners to become members of the station and support the station.
Gate will say 5, 10, 15, 20. Yep. Whatever you can contribute. Was as another show comes to an end, we're looking for $1. Anything you can send. Yep. Yeah. As my brother, the late great Anthony Watson of the Shylights would say, as another day comes to an end, I'm looking for a letter. Anything that you might send. So I guess we will see you in the whirlwind, and thank Lisa Watson for technical brilliance, as Milton Blake would say, per usual. And we will see you in the whirlwind.